On Friday, October 13th, 2023, still days after the horror of the massacre by Hamas on October 7th, Ambassador Dennis Ross joined us at services to provide us with some way of piercing through the emotion and offering a framework for understanding what was happening from an analytic perspective. Just back, and I mean in terms of hours, just back from the Middle East, Ambassador Ross joins us tonight again to share his insights on Iran, the interplay between the Iran and Gaza crises, and the challenges and opportunities ahead. His insights will reflect the proposals laid out in his most recently published book, Statecraft 2.0, What America Needs to Lead in a Multipolar World to Iran and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I have heard on very good authority that it is a page-turner and an excellent beach read, so I really recommend that you all go out, and maybe we will even have a book group after the summer to digest it. With a half-century career in politics and diplomacy, there is a lot I could share with you about Ambassador Ross's accomplishments, but you can look them up, and we want him to have as much time as possible. That said, I will highlight that he was instrumental in assisting Israelis and Palestinians to reach the 1995 interim agreement. He brokered the 1997 Hebron Accord, and he facilitated the 1994 Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty. He is tireless in his efforts toward negotiated solutions and is a model for us of someone who upholds the Jewish and humanitarian pursuit of peace without violence at all cost, if and whenever possible. Currently, the William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Ambassador Ross is also the author of 3 books on the U.S. role in the Middle East peace process, including the National Book Award-winning Doomed to Succeed. Please join me in welcoming him once again to our Bima, Ambassador Ross.
So Shabbat Shalom. It does appear that the only time I come here is during moments of great crisis, which says something about the way you perceive me. It is true, I am just back from Israel. To get back from Israel, you have to go, in my case, through Jordan. Some people are taking boats to Cyprus. The fact is, I was thinking about what I would say to you. You described well what I'll end up talking about, even though that's not the way I was originally thinking about it. What I was thinking about was, well, what are the questions I'm asking myself right now? And I thought if I talked to you about the questions I am asking myself, it would address what's mostly on your minds. The first question, which is less for myself and really more for you, what's going on in Israel right now? What's the mood in Israel right now? And I would tell you the mood is a combination of stoicism, resolve, and resiliency. I sometimes joke that in Israel, 80% of the people can't agree on whether it's day or night. But I can tell you that more than 80% agree that what Israel is doing right now is right. The perception in Israel is that Iran is and has been an existential threat, that Iran has not just posed a threat to Israel, but it has led a determined effort to, in effect, make life unlivable in Israel. That has been Iran's aim. We don't have to discuss what Iran does to its own people. That's pretty clear. But I want you to think about Qasem Soleimani, not of blessed memory. Qasem Soleimani created a strategy that the supreme leader supported, which was called creating a ring of fire around Israel. And what he meant by a ring of fire was to create nonstop pressure from the Iranian proxies so that Israelis would find the cost of living there too high. It reflected a fundamental failing on the part of the Iranians, Nasrallah and Hezbollah, Sinwar and Hamas, a fundamental failing of not understanding what is Israel. They didn't understand that Israelis could disagree, because in their systems, disagreement isn't tolerated. Dissent isn't tolerated. In Israel, disagreement is part of the national identity. You know, when I first went to Israel, the first thing I heard was, well, for every 3 Israelis, there's 4 political opinions. That debate, and we've seen it over the last couple of years, we saw what was actually the most extraordinary grassroots movement that we've seen any place on the planet. The response to what was seen as, depending on your point of view, the judicial reform or the judicial overhaul, was basically 1% to 2% of the entire Israeli public coming out to demonstrate every week. There is no other place where you've seen grassroots democracy in action that way. But in the current context, there isn't a disagreement. The entire political opposition, all the leaders of the opposition opposing political parties, all the leaders accept and support what's going on. Again, for the reasons I said. Iran's purpose has been to make Israel unlivable. It says on a regular basis that Israel shouldn't exist. It calls Israel a cancer. The supreme leader says repeatedly that Israel won't be there in 20 or 25 years. Apologists for the Iranians say, well, when he says that, what that means is, you see, he's not acting on it. He thinks it'll just come. That would be fine except for one thing. All their policies were geared to do that, to make Israel unlivable. Why was it that Iran was enriching to 60%? The Director General of the IAEA is the nuclear watchdog for the UN. He said that there is no justifiable civilian purpose to enrich to 60%. Every country that has enriched to 60% has also produced a nuclear weapon. There is no reason to assume a peaceful intent when the Iranians have consistently demonstrated that they don't have that. So in the face of this, Israelis are stoic. I can tell you, from having been there, you get up several times a night because of the sirens. They have been stoic. There is a measure of destruction that you've seen. The Soroka Hospital was hit. It's a hospital that served all of southern Israel. The Weizmann Institute has been hit in Rehoboth in a way that will probably set it back 3 or 4 years to rebuild. When I say rebuild, it will be rebuilt. That's not a question. But all the scientific research that was going on there, all that's been put on hold. So an Israeli body politic has a consensus, is resolved, will not submit to the idea that somehow they should accept an outcome that doesn't deal with the nature of the threat. Okay, so that's the reality, the mood in Israel. What about the question of why now? Why did Israel move now? There are a lot of people who are out there saying, including a lot of political people, who are saying, why did Israel do this? Why now? Let me offer an explanation for why now. Number one, since February, the Iranians have been enriching about 4 times what they were doing before, the amount at 60%. I'll be very specific on this. Prior to February, they were enriching 9 kilograms a month at 60%. Since February, they have enriched 40 kilograms a month. 40 kilograms is more than enough to produce a bomb. The Iranians had accumulated 10 bombs worth at 60%. They had another 5 bombs worth at 20%. Above 20% is highly enriched uranium. The significance of that is the larger the accumulation, the greater the possibility of being able to disperse it in hidden places, which would mean the Iranians would have the raw material to create a bomb hidden away, squirreled away, and they could reserve that for a time when they decided they would go for a bomb. They have the technical know-how, What you need is this raw material. When you enrich, you either create a fuel for a reactor to generate electricity, and if that's the case, you enrich to less than 5%, or if you enrich above 20%, you're talking about something fundamentally different, the basis of creating a bomb. So Israel was seeing an accumulation of enriched uranium at high levels, close to weapons grade, that could in fact be dispersed. That's number one. Number two, why now? There was a window of opportunity, but a window could close. The window stemmed from several things. First, Hezbollah was decimated by the Israelis. Hezbollah, before being decimated, had 150,000 rockets. Some people used to say Iranians look at Hezbollah as their insurance policy. No, they never looked at it as their insurance policy. They looked at them as their deterrent. If Israel knew if they struck Iran, there would be 150,000 rockets that would rain on Israel, saturating, overwhelming Israel's missile defense capability, that would deter the Israelis from acting. So the first element of the window was the weakening, dramatic weakening of Hezbollah, so that deterrent was no longer there. The second element was on the night of October 26th of last year, Israel took out all the radars of the strategic air and missile defenses in Iran in an operation that surprised everyone about its effectiveness. That meant that Iran wouldn't have a great deal of air defense, wouldn't be able to resist very easily. The Israelis also destroyed much of the ballistic missile producing capability, though they didn't destroy the ballistic missiles. The chief of staff of the Israeli military today said that prior to the war, Iran had 2,500 ballistic missiles with a range capable of reaching Israel. So Israel had destroyed 90% of the ballistic missile producing capability against the backdrop of an inventory that was about 2,500. That doesn't count the short-range missiles, just those that could reach Israel. The Iranians were recouping their production capability of missiles. So if Israel didn't act, there was a danger that you would see a dramatically greater number of ballistic missiles that could reach Israel. So there was a vulnerability, which created a window. There was a need created by the reality that the Iranians were boosting not just their levels of enrichment and the stockpiles, but they were also boosting their capability of producing many more ballistic missiles. So there was a sense on the Israeli side, there's a window, and if we don't act, we could lose that window. I would say one other factor in acting at this point. There was also a sense that there probably would be support from the Trump administration for acting. I don't know the extent of this, but I would say when the president said there was a 2-month timetable, that was 60 days. Do you know when the Israelis struck? On day 61. I suspect that when the Prime Minister came and saw President Trump, Trump said, I want to see if we can resolve this diplomatically. And Prime Minister Netanyahu probably said to him, the Iranians will talk forever. They like to talk, and they use that as a vehicle behind which to go ahead and develop their nuclear capability. Don't play into their hands. Trump probably said, I've given a 60-day timetable. I don't think he said to Bibi, on day 61, you can go ahead and strike. But I suspect that Bibi felt, okay, I gave him his time, and the president probably said, look, if it doesn't work, then you can go ahead. I think that was the nature of the discussion. But I point out again, why now? Day 61, one day after the 60th day. Also, one day after the Board of Governors of the IAEA, again, the nuclear watchdog agency of the UN, passed a resolution, the first one in the last 20 years, that found the Iranians not in compliance with their nuclear nonproliferation obligations. And they reaffirmed they could not declare that this was a peaceful nuclear program. So day 61, that coincides also with the statement with the Board of Governors resolution on the Iranian nuclear program. So that helps to explain Why now? Okay, so what are the objectives? What's the end game? What is it that Israel wants to achieve? What the Israelis have said, what the Prime Minister has said, is we have to set back their nuclear infrastructure in a way that removes us as a threat, and we have to set back the ballistic missile capability in a way that removes us as a threat. Both credible kinds of objectives. I'm going to tell you, I think the objective is something broader than that. I think the objective is Iran has built a map in the Middle East where it's okay for them and their proxies to threaten Israel. The whole notion of what I said, the ring of fire. The objective here is basically to say to the region and to the Iranians, no more. Iran will no longer be able to threaten Israel. We have defanged and decimated your proxy network, in which you expended and invested a huge amount of money, $40 billion alone in Syria. And now we have dramatically weakened you. We are changing the map of the Middle East, and we're changing the psychic perception of the realities in the Middle East, where Iran will no longer threaten Israel. That's the objective, the fundamental objective. So, how close are the Israelis to achieving that? And does Israel need the United States to carry out an attack against Fordo? Let me explain what Fordo is. Fordo is it's not the largest enrichment site. The Israelis have taken out the large enrichment sites, which was at Natanz. Fordo is an enrichment site smaller than Natanz, significantly, because there are about 15,000 centrifuges in Natanz. There's about maybe 3,000 in Fordo, but Fordo is built into a mountain. When you hear people say Israel needs bunker busters, they may need bunker busters, but not for Fordo. Fordo's a mountain. You need a mountain buster. The Obama administration developed something called the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. It's a 30,000-pound bomb. Israel doesn't have a plane that could carry it. It has a fuse that ignites only after it penetrates deep underground. It was designed explicitly for Fordo. The only way you can typically destroy a mountain is with a nuclear weapon. We wanted to have a conventional weapon to be able to deal with Fordo. That's what the Massive Ordnance Penetrator is. I will tell you that since 2015, I have pushed for us to give the MOP to the Israelis and to allow them to lease the B-2 because it's a plane that can carry it. I can honestly say that every administration since that time has been able to restrain their enthusiasm for my suggestion. That said, wouldn't be so bad if Israel had the MOP today, because then the talk that, well, Israel can't do it, the United States must. I will say this, I'm not so sure that's true. It is inconceivable to me that Israel would have launched this campaign, which obviously, when you look at what has been done, has been prepared for years. You know, we all look back at the pager operation in Lebanon against Hezbollah, and at the time we marveled at it. I can tell you what Israel did on the first night of this war: decapitating the military leadership, decapitating the Revolutionary Guard leadership, decapitating the Basij, which is the popular militia used by the regime with the Revolutionary Guard to protect themselves. They knew where every one of these leaders were, who all thought they were in a safe place. This operation that the Israelis carried out made the pager operation look pedestrian. So when I look at that, it is inconceivable to me that the Israelis haven't thought about an array of different options that they have. They surprised the world last October 26th. They certainly surprised the world, and clearly the Iranians, when they launched on the night of June 13th. I can tell you something interesting about that. At 3 in the morning, we were all awakened by an announcement that the Israelis had launched a campaign. Why did they awaken all of us? The assumption in their planning was there would be an immediate response by the Iranians. So we had to be ready. You have a 12-minute early warning time with the ballistic missiles. So the siren goes off, you got 12 minutes. Their expectation was there would be, even with everything Israel was doing, the expectation was they would be able to respond. The first response took 18 hours because they were in a state of shock, the Iranians were. Their whole command control was completely disrupted. They didn't know what communication they could trust. The Israelis pulled off a strategic surprise in terms of their military operation. And when I look at that, it's hard for me to believe they don't have other surprises in store for the Iranians, which tells me the Israelis probably can destroy Fordo without us doing it. And personally, I would prefer them to be able to do that. I think it is critical, if there's going to be a diplomatic outcome, for the Iranians to understand that if this war doesn't end soon, and if Fordo isn't part of that destruction, either militarily or politically, the war doesn't end. And if the war doesn't end, they can bring the U.S. in. They will draw the U.S. in. The book that the rabbi was describing, I have a 50-page chapter in there on Iran. One of the things I can tell you, looking at this, I looked at every administration from Carter to today and their approach to Iran and the Iranian response. The Iranians, this regime has always been characterized and preoccupied with regime survival, number one. Number two, they have always feared, going back to the late 1980s when we intervened, and I won't get through how we did, but we intervened in the Iran-Iraq war. They drew the conclusion from that the regime would be threatened if they got into a direct conflict with the United States. And the fact is, every time they have feared, not necessarily military conflict with us, but us raising the price to them in a way that they regarded was threatening to the regime. Even if it was economic, they made concessions. So there is the potential to get a diplomatic outcome, but it requires the effective use of American coercion. Now, coercion can take a negative connotation, meaning the nature of the threat to you, here's what's going to happen, but it can also be positive, saying, look, we can end this war and you can survive, but here are the conditions for you to do it. I don't know whether President Trump is actually going to attack within 2 weeks or not, but I know the more credible that threat is, the greater the likelihood that there could be a diplomatic outcome. Okay, so the fourth question, what comes after this? If the Israelis emerge from this, and this appears to be very successful, and it does appear to be successful, but you say you have to take military achievements and turn them into enduring political ones. That's where diplomacy comes in. The military by itself can change the landscape, and the Israeli military has done that. But it takes a diplomatic effort to transform it into something that's enduring. So will we and others be able to do that? I think there's a potential. If it happens, if Prime Minister Netanyahu is able to credibly claim before the Israeli public that this has been a great success, removing what has been the most profound threat to Israel, the country that was responsible behind all the threats to Israel, Iran doesn't create the conflicts in the region, but it always exploits them. So if he can claim that as a great success, I believe that he will then want to add to that success. And he will want to get all the hostages out of Gaza. And the only way you're going to do that is by being able to reach an agreement and truth. The only way you're getting all the hostages out is if you end the war. Now, what Israel will have done already by what it will have demonstrated in Iran is that if there's an agreement to end the war based on the hostages being released, the Israelis withdrawing, and Hamas not being in control of Gaza, if that's an agreement and the Hamas violates it, who is going to question that the Israelis will come back in after what they've just demonstrated? That's a rhetorical question. No one will question it. And from a political standpoint, I believe his standing would be strengthened to the point where he would pretty much face down Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, those who've been against ending the war because they want to reoccupy Gaza. Reoccupying Gaza, I can't imagine a bigger mistake for Israel. Hamas has already been defeated as a military, but you'll have an insurgency. You know, Hamas is the only military in the world that never wears its uniform except during ceasefires when they're releasing hostages, because they blend into the population. If this follows, if you get an end to the war, if all the hostages are released, you're not going to immediately see normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But you'll have a first step moving in that direction. The Trump administration needs to have a day-after strategy, because that's what will allow you to have an alternative to Hamas. And it can involve the Arabs on a transitional basis with Palestinians, including some from the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority needs to be reformed. It is incredible to come in and run Gaza at this point. But if this is the case, this can be the first step in a process. There is, among Israelis and among Palestinians, there's complete disbelief right now. Each are consumed by a sense of trauma. And in the Arab world, because there's two different realities, in the Middle East, when you go there, and I go not just to Israel, you watch any of the Arab television networks, not Al Jazeera, which is basically an incitement channel. You watch any of the others, you see all the images of the death and destruction in Gaza. In Israel, you don't. Israelis are consumed by their sense of trauma. They feel their own pain. They can't feel anybody else's. The Palestinians are consumed by a sense of trauma, and the Arab mood towards Israel has soured because of those images. But you end the war in Gaza, you begin to create a transitional regime there, you begin to create a process looking towards the future, and things can change. Israel has changed the landscape of the Middle East militarily. There is now an opportunity to turn this into something that is transformative, because Iran, which has been the source of most instability there, will be in a position, even if Israel doesn't achieve everything it wants, Iran is dramatically weakened. I'm not suggesting necessarily I think the regime is going to fall. I am suggesting that regime has to be internally preoccupied for some time to come. You think the supreme leader thinks he can trust anybody in the military and the intelligence organizations? They will be internally consumed for some time to come. There is a moment of opportunity. In the midst of everything that has been so bleak, in the midst of those nights when people are sitting in the middle of the night in their shelters, there is a future that looks much more promising. I am hopeful. I hope all of you will be. Shabbat Shalom.